Hi, superheroes! I'm Pink Phoenix, coming to you from Purdue University College of Veterinary Medicine's League of Vetihumans. Today, our special guest on Vetihumans Live is Porcupine Vet. Thanks for being on the show, Porcupine Vet.
Glad to be here.
To get us started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area in suburban Maryland. And all my life, I've loved animals, but it never really occurred to me to become a veterinarian until I got to college. So I was one of those late bloomers. My whole family are all physicians. So that was sort of the expectation that I would become a medical doctor for people. And, somehow that never seemed to fit. And so I put two and two together in college. I went to Oberlin College in Ohio and had a lot of great support to help me along that path towards becoming a veterinarian. I was lucky enough to go to Cornell because as a Maryland resident, and because I'm a little older, there was no Virginia, Maryland College of Vet Medicine at that point. So, so I just applied all over the place. And fortunately, I was lucky to go to Cornell and then graduated. And I always wanted to do wildlife medicine because I've always been interested in the natural systems and animal behavior and all things wild. Fortunately, I was able to eventually get into that field. And I've been doing wildlife medicine for over 30 years. But it was sort of a circuitous route because, when I went to Cornell, there really wasn't any sort of program in wildlife medicine. And I graduated and I did small animal exotic work and I did some wildlife work on the side. This was in upstate New York. And then the National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association Conference, which is one of the two large professional organizations, was actually in Ithaca. And I attended the conference and I met one of my mentors there, Stuart Porter. He's one of the founders of the Wildlife Center of Virginia. So I ended up doing an internship there. And again, I think my life is just serendipity, really.
I think all of our lives are.
Yeah, this is what I tell my students is I say, you don't have to have your path charted out exactly straight for the rest of your life because you never know what's going to happen. You just need to take advantage of opportunities and be open and equipped, right, to deal with different opportunities as they come your way. So, when I finished my internship, a large wildlife rehabilitation center north of Seattle, Washington, was looking for an assistant director. So I said, well, do you want an assistant director that's a vet? And so they said, yes. So that was great. And I got to move to the West Coast and deal with cool species there. And there was a really large oil spill off the coast of Washington State. The very first summer I was there. Yeah. And before a formal response was set up, the first 200 seabirds came into the basement of the rehab center where I worked because it's one of the largest in the Northwest. So I started doing oil spill response work, and I did that while working at this rehab center. And then eventually I moved down to the San Francisco Bay Area to do oil spill response and seabird waterfowl rehabilitation full time. Lots of responding to spills as well as trainings all over the place for personnel to respond to oil spills. And
I'd love to learn more about that. What's that like? So there's an oil spill. How do you prepare? What
yeah,
animals are coming in? What are you doing?
yeah. I mean, it's really best certainly if there is advanced preparation. Right. I was fortunate enough to be working in California at the time that we were forming what's called the Oiled Wildlife Care Network. And that is part of California Fish and Game that is housed at UC Davis Vet School. So we basically have a whole lot of different centers, rehab centers that are set up and down the coast and also inland now because more oil is being transported inland via train. And we basically have these places set up with equipment and pre-trained volunteers. etc. An oil spill happens, you're activated by Fish and Game or Fish and Wildlife, depending on the state you're working in. Lots of other states obviously are not quite as well organized, but you're basically called in, and there are two of the largest wildlife rehab organizations in the United States: Tri-State Bird Rescue in Delaware and International Bird Rescue in California, and we're contracted out to lots of different oil companies, right? So they call us if there's been a spill, and then things are activated. And there is all sorts of response, right? It's not just wildlife, but I'm focused on the wildlife portion of it. And so hopefully you get a facility set up. You have people out doing search and rescue, bringing in oiled animals. The oiled animals are considered legal chain of evidence. So, yeah, so there has to be very good record keeping. And, as the veterinarian, I am doing a lot of I'm really not that involved right now after, I came to Tufts, but, you're involved in doing things like doing the physical examinations, getting the blood work, seeing what kind of treatment needs to happen. A lot of the treatments happen on a herd health basis, right? Because you might be dealing with hundreds of these birds. So that entails a lot of different work at the beginning and certainly throughout the whole process. A lot of people think that you should just wash them right away. But, many times they're not stable because of all of the effects of oil on wild animals. So we end up having to stabilize them and assess, them physically before they can go through the whole washing, rinsing, drying process, because it's very stressful for them, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. And eventually, we're working with them as they're doing their conditioning for release and helping to determine if they're ready to be released. But it's a whole coordinated effort. In the United States, the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, which followed the Exxon Valdez, dictated that, every state, the oil company has to have some sort of preparedness plan for wildlife. So, yeah.
That's a lot. Thank you.
It is a lot. So, I did that for a number of years, but then I finally decided that I was tired of not necessarily traveling, but, dropping everything at the last minute. And I wanted to have more of a sort of a family life. And so I adopted my daughter from China, and I moved from Davis, California to the East Coast when I took this position at Tufts. And I started here at Tufts as the associate veterinarian at the wildlife clinic here in 2000. And I've been here ever since. And I was director for 11 years. I can't remember exactly, but something like that. And I only stepped down a couple years ago when I became the associate dean for diversity, inclusion, equity, and climate here. So I have a very long title, but that's
a good title. I like that they included climate.
Yeah, no, that's a big part of it, right?
Yeah,
definitely.
It's a huge part of it.
I know. Yeah, I mean, if you're doing things right, then the climate is what's affected by everything that you're doing. So, or contributes to it too. So,
was there a specific moment when you made that switch from physician to veterinarian? Did something happen?
Yeah, I went to college and I just really became much more interested in things like animal behavior and ecology when I was exposed to those things more in college. And I wanted to figure out a way that I could mesh those interests with an interest in medicine. I mean, I certainly was interested in, human medicine, but it never seemed like a calling for me. And when I put two and two together and thought that in some way I might be able to combine veterinary medicine with my interest in working with wild animals and ecological systems, that's, basically when it clicked. I don't think there was an actual aha moment, just sort of the exposure that I got and hearing other people talk about, in college, you talk about all sorts of things, and just talking about different paths that they were taking, and people that were going to medical school for, human medicine, whatever they were talking about never seemed to really call to me. So, So my father, who is was a physician, as was my grandfather, as was my older brother and my younger sister. So there's a lot of people already in human medicine. Uh, but when I said I wanted to be a veterinarian, he had no concept of what that meant or what if that was really okay for me to do with his daughter. I think as he found out more and more about veterinary medicine and how hard it was to get into vet school too, and the things that we could do, he really embraced it. Um, he was a pathologist, an anatomic
Oh,
pathologist.
cool.
Yeah, right. And also he had a practice for the Chinese population in the Washington, D.C. area, in just sort of general, internal medicine sorts of work. So as the pathologist, when I would come home from veterinary school, I would bring some like histo slides back, right?
All right.
And we would like look at slides together, and he would bring me something from, humans, and we would do comparative pathology together. So
Ah, that's
that
awesome.
was really a cool bonding experience, right? Yeah, yeah,
Oh.
yeah. So yes, definitely embraced it. So that was great.
When you switched to thinking about being a veterinarian, what did you think being a veterinarian would be like? And what is it really like?
Yeah, good question. So I had a concept. Of course, I had then gotten some experience working in different veterinary clinics. I actually worked in a lab animal facility too. So, I had a concept from some of those experiences about what being a veterinarian was like. Of course, I was always, thinking about wild animals, and I couldn't quite figure out how that was going to happen, but I just had faith that things were going to happen that way because that's what I wanted it to do. So, yeah, and so I you went to veterinary school. Of course, there's mostly all just domestic animal stuff. I think we had a poultry class, right? So, but then I got out into vet practice, and I found that I really did enjoy talking to people about their pets and seeing their pets, and I especially liked being sort of the exotics person because nobody else in the practice wanted to deal with any of those, and that was sort of a good training for me for working with wildlife. Back when I started wildlife medicine, like I said, there really wasn't much in the way of any sorts of trainings for veterinarians, so. A lot of it was just jumping off right from domestic animal medicine, things that were known about that and exotics, and then extrapolating that to wild animals. And there were a few people, like I said, my mentor, who had been doing some wildlife medicine. And when I say wildlife medicine, I have to clarify because it's actually wildlife medicine for individuals rather than population sort of wildlife medicine. That's a little bit different. Population management, conservation work. For me, it was always about treating the individual wild animals that come in. And I was able, like I said, to do some of that in the context of practice. And so that was great. But I was always aiming towards doing it more full time if I could, because a lot of the reason that I do this sort of thing and that other people do this sort of thing is because the reason that many of these animals become injured or poisoned or whatever they come in for is because of some sort of anthropogenic exposure, right? So they're hit by cars, or they're tangled in fishing line, or they're burned by methane burners. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that wild animals get into trouble, and definitely it feels like giving back, right? To give them a second chance. I mean, knowing that it's only a small percentage, certainly, of wildlife that come into our center at Tufts and all the other centers that are in the United States and around the world, but at least we're helping some of them, and it's,
Yeah, and that's a big impact on that individual animal.
of course, right, right. And as veterinarians, that's what I really find most gratifying. Of course, for us, it's actually getting an animal out the door, like releasing an animal out into the wild, which nothing beats that kind of feeling, right?
Feeling. Well, this is the perfect segue.
Oh.
What has been your best day ever as a vet so far?
Yeah, gosh. As I said, the releases of the wild animals that we've worked with are really so gratifying. And I guess one of the ones that really sticks out into my mind is a golden eagle that we worked with. They're they're larger than bald eagles, right? And okay, so I have to confess that my view of wild animals is totally skewed by how well they do in captivity, right? So, I mean, I love all the animals that come in, but bald eagles can sometimes be a pain because they're very fussy, uh, and they don't like to eat, and they're uncooperative. So, the we've only had the one golden eagle since I've been here because the eastern population is endangered. I mean, there's not many at all in the east, and they're out west, but they're also still pretty scarce out west now, or becoming scarcer. So this eagle was found down on the ground, not flying, on the New York Connecticut border, and it was brought up to us. And it turned out to have had a injury to its leg and foot on one side, just because probably some poor prey species that was trying to eat was bit it and it got infected, right? So it was fairly simple to treat with wound care and antibiotics and splinting and that sort of thing. And so the bird was with us for a month, and he was just lovely, right? He would eat, and then if we had to get him in hand, be one of these birds that would just be like, "Okay, fine, do whatever you need to do, and I'm not going to fight you the whole time. I'm not going to fuss." I'm not sure that all of them are like that, of course, but that was my experience. And because they're very rare on the East Coast, there were some people working on monitoring their populations. And so we worked with some biologists to put a satellite transmitter on this golden eagle when it was ready to be released. And yeah, it was cool because we released it exactly back where it came from, New York, Connecticut border, because it was familiar with that territory. And it stayed around there for about 2 weeks, just, getting its bearing and getting back into the wild and eating, live caught things rather than what we had to feed it in captivity. And then it just took off like a shot. This was in maybe about this time of the year. It took off like a shot straight north because they nest way far up, like near the Arctic Circle. They breed up.
Oh,
Yeah, it was crazy. And in fact, it was so far north, we lost some of the satellite transmission. So we didn't really know what happened to the bird until it came back south. Right?
ah.
In the
How long was he gone?
Well, it was about like in the fall, so about 6 months or so, where it was up there. And then it flew back into satellite range, I suppose. And we got all that data from where it ended up exactly, and then its route back down to where we picked it up again. And it came back exactly back to where we had released it. That was where it wanted to be, which is like amazing if you think about it, like migratory patterns
Yes.
just in general. But the really cool thing was that these biologists were using the migration patterns that they were seeing in the flight areas that these birds were in to help determine where different wind turbines could be sited, right, for wind power. Because they like to site them on high ridges where there's a lot of wind, and that's exactly where golden eagles like to fly. So they were using this information to help avoid putting them on some of these migratory routes too. So, for me, that's so gratifying because it's one individual bird that helped a population, right? I mean, this was a new migratory pattern they hadn't seen before. So that I
And
think that's like one of my favorite moments, definitely.
that's wild and gratifying that they were considering the eagles before they were just placing their turbines.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Well,
that's
there's the Endangered Species Act that I'm sure they were concerned about too. But definitely, that there was definitely a concern, right, for the eagles and their welfare. So I appreciated that.
like that. All right. Similarly, what's the most exciting thing you've gotten to do as a veterinarian?
The most exciting thing. Well, I've worked with all sorts of different species, which is fun. We also take care of a small zoo slash natural history museum nearby us, and they had a polar bear there. So, I've gotten to sedate and work on a polar bear. I've gotten to work with porcupines. So this will explain my name a little bit, right? Because porcupines are my favorite mammals that come in to us. It's partly just because they have such a bad rap, but they're really wonderful, interesting creatures. So I kind of, feel a fondness for them because of that. I mean, partly, again, I'm prejudiced, right? So they come in and they eat. It's fine, right? They're not fussy about any of that. And contrary to a lot of people's knowledge, they don't shoot quills at you, right? They have to, slap their tail and actually embed the quills in the silly dog's face or whatever that's trying to bother it. And they just move really slowly, and they're pretty easy to work with. And you have to sedate them for things, but they're pretty easy to work with. So I love working with porcupines. I love working with all the animals, but porcupines have a special place in my heart. And go ahead.
Why do they usually come in?
Oh gosh, yeah. So, well, they can get into all the same kinds of trouble that other animals do, getting hit by cars or, entanglements and things like that. They are arboreal, partly arboreal, and they, however, are clumsy. Does not seem like a very good combination, but there you go, right? Yeah.
I have monkey tail skinks at home. I have a few colonies, and I know why they could easily be endangered.
Right? I mean, so they do fall out of trees. They do quill themselves sometimes too. But they get into trouble, certainly getting hit by cars, etc. They also den in other animals' dens, like unoccupied ones. And so sometimes they pick up mange, sarcoptes, from these dens. And so we do see quite a few that have sarcoptic mange, and also sometimes secondary ringworm with that too. The other thing we do see them in for fairly frequently is Balis ascaris larval.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because again, they're feeding where there was raccoon feces, etc. And unfortunately, they're getting some of the roundworm eggs and then the larvae that migrate into their brains. And so we see neurological porcupines, pretty frequently too, which is sad because there's not much we can do for that. The damage has already been done. But yeah, I mean, anything you can imagine.
So how do you prepare for feeding all of these animals for the nutrition?
Right. So yeah, I mean, we have a huge variety of different animals. In the summertime, it's crazy busy, right? Because it's seasonal. Spring and summer, it's crazy because the animals are out and about and they're having babies that are getting into trouble also. And then people are out and about finding the animals. So yeah, the caseload really zooms up. I mean, we might have like more than 100 animals in house at one point.
Oh.
Yeah. And even in the winter, which is our, quote, slower season, I mean, right now we have 30 some animals in house. That's really low for us, which is great. I mean, it helps us to catch our breath a little bit. But feeding them, right? I mean, you have to be prepared to feed a whole wide variety of different species, right? So we get in amphibians, frogs, toads, the occasional salamander. We get in all kinds of reptiles, mostly turtles, some snakes, and probably about 65% though are birds. And that's everything from little hummingbirds to big eagles, like I mentioned. And then maybe 30% or so, maybe a little higher, mammals. Many of those are common backyard species, right? So squirrels and rabbits and all of those. But we also can see carnivores. I mean, we have set up for that. So, I mean, we do see coyotes. We have a coyote with mange right now. Bobcats. We've had endangered Canada lynx from Maine that have come down, mostly getting caught in leg hole traps. So, having fractured bones or soft tissue injuries. And yeah, so, again, it's a huge variety. So we're lucky enough for all of the animals that will eat whole prey. We do get some culled mice that are donated to us from some of the biopharma labs around here. We, have to be prepared to feed fish. We have to be prepared to feed birds like quail, right, that we have to buy. But then we also have waterfowl, starter pellets, maintenance pellets, game bird, diets, things like that. And lots of different kinds of seed, rodent chow, everything you can imagine. We get different kinds of fruits and vegetables donated to us from some of the local grocery stores, which is nice. In the summer, we go out and we pick greens from outside and bring those in for the animals too. So the students are all required to do a rotation through the wildlife clinic because we really believe that everyone should have some exposure. Because if you go out into practice, right, which is where most of them are going to go, people will bring them wild animals just because you're supposed to know everything about everything, even if you don't think you do. So we want our students to have a little bit of an education. And so I think they really enjoy the rotation, from the reviews that we get. Yeah, they
How
get to
could
go
you not?
outside. Yeah, I mean, you get to see these cool species. You get to learn how to, I don't know, catch a red-tailed hawk, right, and handle it safely. And, get to go outside. And we have two very large flight barns. They're like 100-foot long and 40-foot tall, et cetera. And that's where we will condition a lot of the larger birds to fly prior to their release, right? Because if one comes in with a fracture, the birds heal up fractures quickly, which is nice, like maybe 4 weeks or so. But then they need to gradually, get into larger and larger cages and then eventually into the big flight barn. So they might not have flown a good distance, right, for maybe like 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something like that. So we have our big flight barns out there, and the students get to chase the birds back and forth and make them fly. Because I've decided now that I'm older and my knees hurt, I don't need to do that part anymore. The students can do that. So they get exercise too.
It contributes to wellness.
Right, exactly. Right,
It
exactly.
sounds like an amazing experience.
Yeah, I hope it's fun for the students. I mean, I know it is, and they get to learn so much that they haven't learned anywhere else. So
Well, your career now has switched gears again. Can you tell us about what you do in the DEI, and we'll add C for climate
yeah, sure,
space?
sure. So, you know, I've always been interested in working with a diverse student population, and I did admissions work for many, many years. I chaired our admissions committee, et cetera. And, we did a lot of work to try to reduce bias. We dropped the GRE as a requirement, different things like that. But I felt that there was a larger need on the school level. And fortunately, our university is very supportive of all of these, DEIJ efforts. J for justice, right? Social justice, right? And when George Floyd was murdered, the university vowed that we were going to become an anti-racist institution. And so we set up 5 different work streams to gather information about things that were current practices and make recommendations for what we could do. And we came up with over 180 recommendations, right? And so I got to be part of the work groups too, and I was appointed associate dean. Maybe I think it was March of 2020. So it's been about 2 years now. And this was all part of having different associate deans at all the different schools within the university too, that were focused on diversity, equity, inclusion. Right now, I'm only supposed to be 60% of my time doing that. But I'm going to go to full time fairly soon, I hope. Because really, there's more than enough to do, as you know, right?
Yes.
Right. And so initially, we had an anti-racism task force that I chaired on campus, and we developed a strategic plan for our school about different areas of emphasis, compositional diversity, educational efforts, capacity and resources, all those sorts of things. And so, really, I'm working a lot on different parts of that strategic plan. They include things such as working on faculty hiring processes, for instance. How can we make our faculty hiring processes so that we are reaching out to a broader applicant pool, for one thing, to people that we might not normally be reaching with the usual sorts of ways that ads are placed. What can we do to encourage a more unbiased review of applications, right? So we have different rubrics that are being used for our search committees. I do implicit bias training for search committees too. And then there are various interview kinds of processes that we've put in place, standardized questions, ways to evaluate those questions, and all those sorts of things. And so, the searches are not ever completely the same, but we've been trying to really standardize them with an eye towards reducing bias. And we have candidates that submit some of their thoughts about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice also in their application packet. So, that's just one of the things that we've been working on. I worked with our academic affairs dean to add diversity considerations into our professionalism course. So,
Excellent.
yeah, so I taught 6 hours of diversity, equity, inclusion considerations into our professionalism course for the first year class and the second year class this past fall. That was the first time we did that. But I hope, at least from what they said, it was very helpful for them. You had to start with the basics for some people, and for others, they were way even ahead of me and my knowledge, right? Which is great. I love that our student body is so active and aware of these situations, right? I think that's probably the case in a lot of veterinary schools.
Yeah, becoming the case.
Yes.
Thankfully.
I hope. Yes, right. Thankfully.
But the more we can do to integrate it into everything, the better we are all as a society.
Exactly. And I did a whole session, and you could do a whole course or a whole 4 years on systemic racism, but I did talk to them just some of the basic examples of systemic racism. Federal housing policies, right? Loan policies, everything that's gone on, lack of generational wealth. And I think a lot of our students had not really heard about the extent of any of that. So,
or hadn't taken the time to consider it deeply.
Right. And some people's reaction when they hear things like white privilege or systemic racism is to kind of retract from that, as sort of an accusatory term. And I really emphasize that it was not based on accusations against, individuals per se. It's really more of how all of that is embedded into our institutions, right? Into institutions of higher education, as well as certainly within society in the United States, and how slavery, really became the driving force for a lot of the injustices that have then ensued systemically, as if being enslaved wasn't horrible enough, right? But the need to put people into those lower categories and the legal means that were used to do that. I think it's so important that become common knowledge, and hopefully some sort of consensus about what can we do about this.
You are doing so many profoundly impactful things.
God, thank you.
I can tell how passionate you are about all of them, and I feel like you must be incredibly emotionally invested in everything that you do.
Yeah, definitely.
How do you take care of yourself? What are you doing for fun to give yourself the energy?
Oh, yeah. I know, really, because wellness is so important too. Even though you're doing this hard work, you do have to take care of yourself because you want to be able to keep doing this hard work, right? And so, I think I have a fair number of things that I'm really interested in. I love reading. So, I do a lot of subject matter reading, but I also, love fiction. I am a baseball nut, so I follow the Red Sox, Boston Red Sox, religiously. So I love that. We actually have their AAA affiliate in Worcester, which is the town next to
Oh,
me.
nice.
So it's very nice. I love the ocean, and fortunately, I live in Massachusetts, so I can go out to the coastline whenever I want and go just walk on a beach. And because I love birds so much, I think all of my loves begin with B. This is what I've kind of decided. Isn't that
That's
weird,
great.
right? Beaches, birds, books, baseball. But really, I don't know how that did not on purpose develop that way. But I do love birds. I love bird watching. And when I retire, I'm going to have more time to do more of that. I don't think that having them come into the clinic and having them in hand really counts on your life list as a birder. But I have seen some cool species. So, but I do love that. And that's just part of, getting outside and enjoying myself outside, which is very calming for me. So.
That's excellent. I love the bee theme. I can't wait to hear what's next.
I know, right? Who knows?
So tell us about your superpowers and how you're using them to inspire others through the league.
So, superpowers, which is kind of funny to think of it that way, but I think one of my superpowers is the ability to hopefully genuinely listen to people, and hear what they have to say and try not to be judgmental. I mean, I think that's something that all of us should strive for. But it's hard. I mean, we're really ingrained to kind of manufacture responses as we're talking to people, right? And not really listen carefully to what they say. And certainly when people are expressing opinions, beliefs that are so contrary to something that, I would believe in, it's very hard to slow down and listen, but that's really the most important thing that you can do in a circumstance like that, right? Not come up with a really smart retort or anything like that, but really listen and then hopefully pull from daily examples, things that right? Not just facts, but daily encounters that you've had to sort of say, but I had this wonderful person who I worked with was, it was, I don't know, like, this wonderful person happened to be transgender, but was like, the best manager I ever had. Right. So, I mean, just trying to humanize things for people. I try and do that. I also try just to be kind. I don't think I'm always successful, of course, in everything, but I don't know. I try to be kind and put myself in other people's shoes, and think empathetically, about what other people are going through. Because those people, again, maybe that have completely different views, you don't know what their lives are like. You don't know what they're going through, right? And it just seems fairer to try to find out more, right? To offer yourself your help, right? If you can. So I don't know if those are superpowers, but those are things I strive for.
I think those are wonderful superpowers that we all can work to develop and learn to use.
Thank you. Yes. Well, it's a lifelong journey, right? That will never be completed, but we try.
It is.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of listeners out there who want to be veterinarians. What inspirational message do you have for them?
Well, as I described, I took a pretty circuitous route to get to where I am now. And I guess I would just say, believe in yourself, pursue a path that you truly believe in, but also don't be discouraged if things happen not exactly the way you have it mapped out, because I think everything that you do is a learning opportunity, and you can take that and eventually work towards where you really want to be in your career, in your life, right?
Absolutely, that is fantastic. Thanks so much for being on the show, Porcupine Vet.
You're so welcome. I had a great time talking to you, Pink Phoenix.
You can learn more about other League of Vetahuman superheroes at vetahumans.org. If you like this episode, and I know that you did, please subscribe, rate, and share it with your friends. And remember, use your powers for good.